Thank you, members. I ask that we adjourn in memory for Richard Warren Mazzerra. Richard was a dynamic force in California's food and restaurant renaissance, starting in the early 80s at La Toque restaurant in Los Angeles, then the original Victoria Station, a restaurant that was in boxcars in San Francisco, but then went on to become a chain, as the first general manager of Chez Panisse, and then on to opening his own restaurants, Bar Cesar's in Berkeley, Cesar's in Oakland, and many others. He left us on December 15th after a year-long battle with cancer. Born in Stockton, Richard had a dry wit, an infectious sense of humor, and a talent for making people feel good. And everyone who I've ever spoken to who met him and dealt with him had only good things to say about him. How many of us will have that when we pass? He studied restaurant management at Cal Poly Pomona, and then he worked briefly for Jackson Browne, for the musician Jackson Browne, who then was his lifelong friend. After graduating, Richard went to work as maitre d' for Chef Ken Frank's La Toque in LA in the early 80s. And Chef Frank also counted Richard as a lifelong friend, and he said that Richard's relentless positive attitude towards life was infectious and defined who he was. So then, shortly after La Toque, Richard moved back to the Bay Area, and Alice Waters hired him as the very first general manager at Chez Panisse. Now, for any of you who followed Chez Panisse's history, functioning as a business was not in the restaurant's worldview in its first decade of existence. Richard patiently brought Chez Panisse into the business world, computerizing their payroll, all of their systems, and of course he had to do that very patiently. After 12 years at Chez Panisse, Richard opened his own tapas bar, Bar Cesar, which is still right next door to Chez Panisse if you visit Berkeley. Then he went on to open the second Bar Cesar, a restaurant named Assemble in Richmond next to the Rosie the Riveter Memorial, and more recently, Table Food and Drink in Rancho Santa Fe. At Richard's celebration of life, which was just last week, Jackson Browne fondly remembered Richard as a consistent supporter of social justice movements in the 70s and until today, and remembered him opening up Chez Panisse whenever Jackson Browne's band or other bands were in the area to hold benefit concerts for the various social movements, whether it was anti-nuclear, anti-war, various others. And then after his stint at Chez Panisse, when he owned his own restaurants, he and his wife, Terumi, welcomed band staff and volunteers, and they were always insistent. They were preparing the food and making it available, not so much for the Jackson Brownes, but rather for the roadies, the staff, and the volunteers who all accompanied those when they were doing those concerts. Humble, funny, and generous, Richard will truly be missed by his wife, Terumi Shibata Mazzerra, his children, Jack Mazzerra and Kate Mazzerra, Kiyomi Dodi, Saruni Dodi, his sister Nancy, his 91-year-old mother, Virginia, and all of us who loved him.